The quiet before the storm. The Emergency Council. The emergency klaxons had been silent for exactly 17 minutes when Captain Marcus Chen walked into the war room aboard Nexus Prime. The massive space station served as the headquarters for the Galactic Defense Council, and today its gleaming corridors buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 12 different species had gathered for what many believed would be the most crucial military briefing in galactic history. The Void Syndicate had struck without warning, their black ships emerging from dark space like nightmares given form. In the span of 72 hours, they had consumed 3 entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty void where billions of lives once thrived. Now their fleet of over 10,000 vessels was advancing toward the core worlds, and conventional military wisdom suggested the galaxy had perhaps 2 weeks before total annihilation. Chen took his usual position at the circular holographic table, his human frame looking almost fragile among the diverse assembly of alien dignitaries. To his left sat Admiral Korath of the Vectani Imperium, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's bioluminescent lights. Her compound eyes reflected the tactical displays with mathematical precision, processing battle scenarios at speeds that would overwhelm most organic minds. General Thys of the Aquarian Federation occupied the seat across from Chen. His translucent blue form contained within a sophisticated environmental suit that maintained the high-pressure, low-temperature atmosphere his species required. The emotional resonance chambers on his suit glowed with deep purple hues, indicating the profound anxiety that all present felt but few could express so visibly. Commander Zephyr represented the Stellar Wing Collective, though represented seemed an inadequate term for a being whose essence existed as pure energy barely contained within a crystalline matrix. The commander's thoughts manifested as cascading patterns of light that rippled across the chamber's walls, creating an almost hypnotic display of calculated concern. The situation requires no lengthy introduction. Admiral Korath began, her voice carrying the mechanical precision typical of her species. Void Syndicate forces have eliminated 3 star systems with complete efficiency. Their consumption rate indicates technological capabilities far exceeding our current defensive parameters. The holographic display materialized above the table, showing the advancing wave of destruction. Each red marker represented a Syndicate vessel, and there were so many that they formed an almost solid crimson wall spanning several light years. Behind this wall lay empty space, devoid of stars, planets, or any trace that civilization had ever existed there. General Thys's emotional resonators shifted to deep amber, the color of grief mixed with determination. Our combined fleets represent the greatest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Surely our united strength can halt this advance. United strength built on conventional tactics, Commander Zephyr's energy patterns pulsed with skeptical yellow frequencies. The Syndicate has demonstrated immunity to standard military strategies. They absorb energy weapons, adapt to kinetic bombardments, and seem to predict our movements with disturbing accuracy. For the next 6 hours, the Council debated. They discussed formation strategies, discussed resource allocation, discussed evacuation protocols for civilian populations. They analyzed Syndicate ship designs, studied their attack patterns, and calculated probability matrices for various defensive scenarios. Every possible angle was examined, every traditional military doctrine was considered. Throughout this entire discussion, Captain Marcus Chen remained completely silent. The human anomaly. Chen's silence was not merely notable, it was unprecedented. In the 14 months since humanity had joined the Galactic Defense Council, Chen had become infamous for his constant interjections, alternative suggestions, and what many species considered to be irritatingly creative approaches to military problems. Human tactical thinking, with its emphasis on adaptability and unconventional solutions, had initially been dismissed by most council members as chaotic and inefficient. That dismissal had lasted exactly until the Battle of Kepler 442, where Chen's absurd strategy of using garbage haulers as stealth vessels had resulted in the liberation of an entire occupied system. Since then, his input had been grudgingly respected, even when it challenged fundamental military principles that had served the galaxy for millennia. But today, Chen sat motionless, his dark eyes focused on the tactical displays with an intensity that made several council members uncomfortable. His hands, which typically gestured enthusiastically during his explanations, remained folded on the table. His expression, usually animated with human emotion, had settled into a mask of contemplative stillness. Admiral Korath was the first to acknowledge the anomaly. "Captain Chen, your species has provided valuable tactical insights in previous encounters. Do you have observations regarding our current defensive strategies?" Chen looked up slowly, meeting the Admiral's compound gaze. "No, Admiral. The strategies being discussed are sound." The response sent a subtle wave of unease through the chamber. General Thiss's emotional resonators flickered with confused orange patterns. "Sound. Captain, with respect, you have never described any strategy as merely sound. Your typical response involves at least 3 alternative approaches and a historical reference to some obscure human conflict." A ghost of a smile crossed Chen's face. "I appreciate the observation, General. Today is different." "Different how?" Commander Zephyr's energy patterns shifted to inquisitive blue spirals. Chen was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, every being in the chamber felt a chill that had nothing to do with environmental controls. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that transformed the atmosphere of the entire room. "Because I recognize this enemy." Echoes of Earth. The holographic display shifted as Chen manipulated the controls, calling up files that most council members had never seen. Images of burning worlds appeared, but these were not the recent syndicate attacks. These were older, dating back almost 15 years to conflicts that predated humanity's contact with galactic civilization. "The Terran colony wars," Chen said quietly. "Most galactic records indicate that humanity emerged from these conflicts victorious, having successfully defended our outer settlements against an unknown aggressor. Those records are incomplete. The images showed devastation on a scale that matched the current syndicate attacks. Entire worlds reduced to lifeless rock, space filled with debris that had once been thriving communities. But these were human worlds, human lives, human dreams turned to ash and vacuum. We didn't win," Chen continued, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. "We survived. Barely. The enemy you now call the Void Syndicate consumed 14 of our colony worlds before we found a way to make them stop. Not defeat them, not destroy them, just convince them to leave us alone." General Thiss's emotional resonators cycled through rapid color changes, indicating the struggle to process this revelation. "Captain, if humanity has previous experience with this enemy, why was this information not shared with the Council?" "Because," Chen replied, "the method we use to stop them goes against every principle of honorable warfare that the Galactic Defense Council represents. It required us to become something we never wanted to be." Admiral Korath's mandibles clicked in the Vectani equivalent of deep concern. "Explain." Chen stood up, walking to the viewing port that overlooked the vast construction base where the galaxy's combined fleets were preparing for what many believed would be their final battle. Thousands of ships from dozens of species hung in the void like stars, each one representing the hopes and fears of entire civilizations. "The Syndicate doesn't just consume matter and energy," he said, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. "They consume information. Every world they destroy, every ship they eliminate, every life they take adds to their tactical database. They learn from every encounter, adapt to every strategy, evolve beyond every defense." He turned back to face the Council, and several members recoiled at the expression on his face. It was not the face of the cheerful, inventive human they had come to know. This was the face of someone who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. "Conventional warfare feeds them," Chen continued. "Every battle plan, every tactical formation, every strategic principle in our military databases just makes them stronger. They've been fighting galactic civilization for centuries, learning from every encounter, growing more perfect with each victory. Commander Zephyr's energy patterns have shifted to deep red, the color of alarm and understanding. Then how do we fight an enemy that learns from every attack? Chen's smile returned, but it was nothing like his usual expression. This smile belonged to a predator, something ancient and dangerous, that lay hidden beneath humanity's civilized exterior. We don't fight them, he said. We confuse them. We show them something they've never seen before, something so fundamentally different from their accumulated knowledge that their learning becomes a weakness instead of a strength. The proposal. The silence that followed Chen's words stretched for nearly a full minute. When Admiral Korath finally spoke, her voice carried a tremor that betrayed her species' typically emotionless demeanor. Captain, are you suggesting that we abandon conventional military doctrine entirely? I'm suggesting, Chen replied, that conventional military doctrine is exactly what they expect. It's what they've been studying, what they've been preparing for, what they've been perfecting their defenses against for longer than our civilizations have existed. General Thiss's emotional resonators had settled into a steady deep blue that indicated profound contemplation. What alternative do you propose? Chen returned to his seat, but remained standing behind his chair, his hands gripping its back with white-knuckled intensity. Give me 24 hours. Let me prepare a presentation that shows you exactly what humanity learned during the colony wars. But I warn you now, what I'm going to propose will challenge everything you believe about honor, about warfare, about the very nature of military engagement. The council members exchanged glances that transcended species barriers. Each recognized the gravity of the moment, the weight of a decision that could determine the fate of galactic civilization. Admiral Korath spoke for all of them. Captain Chen, given the unprecedented nature of our current crisis, the Council is prepared to consider any strategy that offers hope of survival. You have your 24 hours. Chen nodded, but as he moved toward the chamber's exit, he paused at the threshold. Without turning back, he spoke one final warning that would haunt the council members' thoughts for the next day. When you see what I'm proposing tomorrow, remember this. Sometimes the only way to save what you love is to become what you hate. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way. Now it's your turn to decide if survival is worth the price. The human solution. The return. 24 hours later, the same emergency council convened in the war room, but everything felt different. The Void Syndicate had advanced another half-light year during the night, consuming 2 more minor systems and adding their mass to the growing wave of destruction. Reports from the front lines painted an increasingly desperate picture. Conventional fleets were being systematically eliminated, their tactics analyzed and countered with ruthless efficiency. Captain Marcus Chen entered the chamber carrying a single datapad and wearing an expression that somehow managed to combine grim determination with something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. The other council members had spent the intervening hours in various forms of meditation, calculation, and consultation with their respective governments. All had reached the same conclusion. Traditional warfare was not merely inadequate against the Syndicate, it was counterproductive. Captain, Admiral Korath began without preamble. Our overnight analysis confirms your assessment. Conventional military engagement with the Syndicate results in accelerated learning patterns that strengthen their adaptive capabilities. We are prepared to hear your alternative. Chen activated his datapad, and the chamber's holographic systems responded by displaying what appeared to be a 3-dimensional maze of impossible complexity. The structure twisted through multiple dimensions, with pathways that seemed to fold back on themselves and connections that defied conventional spatial understanding. This, Chen said, is the Mirror Protocol. The explanation. General Thiss's emotional resonators flickered with confused amber patterns. Captain, I fail to perceive any tactical formations or strategic elements in this display. That's because you're looking at it like a battle plan, Chen replied. This isn't about fighting the Syndicate. This is about teaching them to fight themselves. He manipulated the display, zooming in on specific sections of the maze-like structure. During the colony wars, humanity discovered that the Syndicate's greatest strength, their ability to learn and adapt, could become their greatest weakness if properly exploited. The key insight came from an ancient human concept called psychological warfare. Commander Zephyr's energy patterns shifted to inquisitive spirals. Your species' propensity for mental manipulation tactics is documented, but how does this apply to an enemy that demonstrates no recognizable psychology? Chen smiled, and this time it was his familiar expression, filled with the enthusiasm that had initially annoyed and eventually impressed the Council. Because the Syndicate does have a psychology, it's just not organic. They have a collective learning algorithm that processes information according to specific patterns. Those patterns can be disrupted, redirected, even turned against themselves. The holographic display shifted, showing recordings from the colony wars that few beings outside humanity had ever witnessed. The footage was grainy and incomplete, but it clearly showed human vessels engaged in combat with Syndicate forces. However, the human tactics were unlike anything in conventional military doctrine. Watch closely, Chen instructed. This is the Battle of New Geneva, where we first successfully implemented the Mirror Protocol. The battle. The recording showed human ships approaching a massive Syndicate fleet in what appeared to be a standard attack formation. The enemy vessels, their dark hulls absorbing light like cosmic wounds, began their characteristic adaptive response, analyzing the incoming threat and preparing countermeasures based on their accumulated tactical knowledge. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of executing the attack they had been preparing for, the human ships suddenly broke formation and began performing what could only be described as an elaborate dance. Vessels spiraled around each other in patterns that served no apparent tactical purpose. Weapons fired at empty space, and entire squadrons seemed to pursue objectives that existed only in their commanders' imaginations. What are they doing? Admiral Koraf's compound eyes tracked the seemingly chaotic movements with growing confusion. They're lying, Chen replied simply. The Syndicate response was immediate and telling. Their adaptive algorithms, designed to counter logical military strategies, began processing the human movements and attempting to predict their actual intentions. However, since the humans weren't actually implementing any coherent strategy, the Syndicate found themselves adapting to tactical patterns that didn't exist. The Mirror Protocol works on a simple principle, Shen explained as the recording continued. We give the enemy so much contradictory information that their learning systems become trapped in recursive loops, trying to solve tactical problems that have no solutions because the problems themselves are deliberately meaningless. The psychology of machines. General Thiss's emotional resonators had shifted to fascinated green frequencies. You weaponized confusion itself. More than that, Chen corrected. We weaponized their intelligence. Every piece of false information they processed made them more certain they understood our strategy, which made them less capable of recognizing our actual strategy when we finally implemented it. The recording showed the climax of the battle, where the human fleet suddenly abandoned their chaotic dance and executed a brilliantly coordinated assault on what appeared to be the least important target in the Syndicate formation. However, this unimportant target proved to be the key node in the enemy's command structure, and its destruction caused a cascade failure throughout their entire fleet. The Syndicate had learned to counter every possible human tactic except the one we actually used, Chen continued, because we buried that real tactic under layers of deliberate misdirection. Their adaptive systems filtered it out as statistical noise. Commander Zephyr's energy patterns pulsed with understanding. You made their intelligence work against them by giving it too much to process. Exactly. The human mind evolved to be adaptable precisely because our environment was unpredictable. We learned to thrive in chaos, to find patterns where none existed, to create solutions from seemingly unrelated elements. The Syndicate's machine intelligence, no matter how sophisticated, is still fundamentally algorithmic. It assumes that all behavior serves some logical purpose. The application. Admiral Koreth leaned forward, her mandibles clicking with intense concentration. How do you propose to scale this tactic to our current situation? The Syndicate fleet approaching core galactic space is exponentially larger than the forces you encountered during your colony wars. Chen's expression grew serious. That's where it gets complicated. The mirror protocol works, but it requires every participating force to act against their training, their instincts, and their fundamental understanding of military engagement. Ships have to break formation at critical moments, weapons have to be fired at targets that serve no tactical purpose, and commanders have to make decisions that appear to be complete tactical failures. He paused, looking each council member in the eye. It means trusting human strategic coordination completely, even when, especially when, nothing we're doing makes sense to you. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of massive construction operations in the surrounding shipyards. Each species represented around the table had military traditions spanning millennia, tactical doctrines refined through countless conflicts, and strategic principles that formed the very foundation of their civilizations. You're asking us to abandon everything we know about warfare, General Thiss observed, his emotional resonators cycling through complex patterns of uncertainty and hope. I'm asking you to trust that sometimes the best way to win a war is to make your enemy think you've already lost, Chen replied. Humanity learned this lesson at the cost of 14 worlds and 2 billion lives. We're offering to share that knowledge, so the galaxy doesn't have to pay the same price. The decision. Commander Zephyr's energy patterns had settled into steady, contemplative silver streams. Captain Chen, if we implement your mirror protocol and it fails, we lose our entire combined fleet, and the Syndicate gains tactical knowledge of every military capability in galactic space. If we don't implement it, Chen countered, we lose anyway, just more slowly and with greater suffering. The Syndicate has been fighting galactic civilization for centuries. They know how we think, how we fight, how we organize our defenses. Conventional warfare is exactly what they're prepared for. Admiral Koreth stood up, her exoskeleton catching the light as she moved to the viewing port overlooking the assembled fleet. Thousands of ships from dozens of worlds hung in space like a constellation of hope and determination. Captain, she said without turning around, your proposal requires us to place the survival of galactic civilization in the hands of human tactical coordination. Are you prepared to accept that responsibility? Chen's response came without hesitation. Admiral, humanity has been carrying that responsibility for 15 years. We're finally ready to share it. The vote was unanimous. The implementation. 6 hours later, the largest military fleet in galactic history began executing the most unconventional battle plan ever conceived. Ships that had trained together for months suddenly broke their formations. Weapon systems that had been calibrated for maximum efficiency began targeting empty space, and commanders across dozens of species found themselves following orders that contradicted everything they had ever learned about military strategy. At the center of this orchestrated chaos, Captain Marcus Chen coordinated with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. He tracked thousands of variables simultaneously, calculating not just the tactical effectiveness of each maneuver, but its psychological impact on the Syndicate's learning algorithms. Every seemingly random action served a purpose in the greater pattern of deception. The Syndicate response was immediate and predictable. Their adaptive systems began processing the incoming data, analyzing patterns, and preparing countermeasures. However, instead of finding coherent tactical structures to counter, they encountered layer upon layer of contradictory information. Their algorithms, designed to find order in chaos, began creating phantom patterns from random noise. It's working, Chen reported as he monitored the enemy's response patterns. Their learning systems are getting trapped in recursive analysis loops. They're adapting to strategies that don't exist. The real assault came 3 hours later, buried within what appeared to be another round of meaningless maneuvers. While the Syndicate focused on countering imaginary threats, human-coordinated strike teams eliminated key nodes in their command structure. The attacks were precise, devastating, and completely invisible to enemy analysis systems that had been overwhelmed with false data. Victory. The Battle of Nexus Prime lasted 18 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the Void Syndicate's invasion fleet, not through superior firepower or technological advantage, but through the simple application of human psychology to machine intelligence. The enemy's greatest strength had become their fatal weakness. In the aftermath, as debris from 10,000 enemy vessels drifted through space like metallic snow, the Council reconvened to assess their victory. The chamber felt different now, charged with a new understanding of what warfare could become when conventional wisdom was abandoned in favor of creative thinking. Captain Chen, Admiral Korath began, her voice carrying a respect that had been earned through shared danger. The galaxy owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Chen shook his head. No debt, Admiral. This is what allies do for each other. We share our strengths to cover each other's weaknesses. General Thiss's emotional resonators glowed with warm golden frequencies. What happens now? The Syndicate may adapt to these tactics eventually. Then we'll develop new ones. Chen replied with a smile. That's what humans do. We adapt, we improvise, we overcome. And now that the galaxy knows what we're capable of when we work together, I don't think any enemy will find us quite so predictable. As the Council members prepared to depart, each returning to their respective worlds, with news of victory and tales of human ingenuity, Admiral Korath paused at the chamber's exit. Captain, she said, in future briefings, I hope you'll be more vocal about your observations. The galaxy has learned the value of listening when humans have something to say. Chen chuckled, the sound carrying none of the darkness that had shadowed it during the previous day's session. Don't worry, Admiral. I have a feeling I'll have plenty to talk about in our next meeting. The laughter that followed echoed through the chamber and out into the corridors of Nexus Prime, carrying with it the sound of a galaxy that had learned to appreciate the deadly creativity that emerges when humans finally decide to break their silence.